Thank you very much. It is a real honor to be here and to have this opportunity to present this material to all of you. Before I get into that, even though I want to just thank TrAIN, really deeply thank TrAIN for this opportunity to present the work. Toshio deserves a lot of thanks and credit for making this such an incredible resource and research institution here at the University of the Arts in London. I also just need to thank the US-UK Fulbright Commission for making it possible even to be here in the first place. They have been really fantastic and supportive. And certainly the faculty members and staff here at both Chelsea College, specifically in the University of the Arts in London more generally, have been wonderful. Oriana Badali, Becky Green, Kate Pelling, and others have just made everything run very smoothly for me, and I really appreciate all the help that people have given. So tonight, I'm going to invite you to join me in some speculations on a future project. And if it's okay with all of you, I'll turn the lights down. Is that all right? Because I think the slides will look a lot better if I do that. Is that cool? Well, let's see. Let's see what happens. If anyone gets afraid of the dark, just let me know. Oh, there we go. Right now I'm working on a book project, and I'm in the throes of finishing this project, actually. So I'm starting this talk with the project that I'm finishing. And the project that I'm finishing is a book on the infamous Pruitt-Igoe Public Housing Project. Some of you may know this project, others may not. That's not really important. What's important is to know that this was one of the more notorious large-scale social housing experiments conducted in the United States. It ended in this rather famous blast episode. This image was produced in 1972 when the housing project was imploded and to make way for other kinds of buildings. It was built in 1954. It was torn down in 1972, 73, 74, in that range. Only lasted about 20 years, but I'm quite obsessed and fascinated by it. So I decided to write a social and design history of this project. That is not only the history of the kind of design and planning around the project, but also a history of the lives of the people who lived there, the lives of the people who worked in the project, because I'm very interested in that moment in the 20th century when people begin to imagine that large-scale projects like this are possible. That's an important moment, I would say, in the history of cities in the 20th century. That moment when people begin to imagine the city as a place where large-scale experiments like this are possible. That's the major hurdle. Building them is the easy part. But getting to that first sort of imaginary, that you can believe that such projects are possible in the first place and desirable in the second place, is a major step, a major transformation that occurs in the 20th century. And what I became really interested in as I was delving into this project was that kind of earlier phase, that earlier moment in the 20th century when that developed. That is, the question really in my mind was, when is it that it becomes possible to imagine projects like this? And so what I'm doing now, I'm going to move my research into this next project really on that question. And what I want to do tonight with the time I have here, and because I have a group of I think, very interesting people who I think can help me think about ways in which to strategize a reading of images and a reading of a whole set of visual strategies, is to present the work to you that I'm now engaged in, this new research project. So as you saw, the research project is tentatively titled The Known City. And by that, I really mean the ways in which the city itself is organized rhetorically, so that we can imagine that it is a knowable place. And I'll get to that more specifically in a minute. So my principal interest now in this new project really has to do with the ways in which discourses of urbanism become mobilized visually in the 20th century. That is, the ways in which the visual regimes, the visual registers, enable the production of urban imaginaries. And this is done in many ways, of course, throughout the 20th century. The possibilities, the range of things are kind of endless. And popular culture and mass media are especially important and fertile areas in which urban imaginaries come to be produced and circulated and consumed in the United States and elsewhere. But what I want to do tonight is actually shy away a bit from looking at the sort of broad spread of popular culture and mass media, and look more specifically and in a more targeted way at the visual rhetorics that are promulgated by groups with very specifically urban agendas, right? So I'm interested in people who have particular arguments to make about the city for a particular set of reasons. And what I want to do is look at how those groups with those particular agendas and interests mobilize the visual register to make their claims about cities. So I'm going to be looking at a particular cadre of images, a particular set of metaphors, a particular range of tropes that gets recycled over and over again in the 20th century relative to cities. And I'm looking at the ways in which a group of people, and I'll define these people more specifically in a bit, are searching for a language. They're searching for a language in which to describe urban conditions, to conceive urban problems, and to imagine solutions to those problems they have conceived, right? And that's an important thing we'll also come back to. So what I'm really concerned with right now is the kind of organization and recruitment of urban images towards the ends of governmentality, towards the ends of capillary power, the expression of capillary power in the modern nation state. So, I'm looking at dispersed archives in multiple formats. That's what I mean by deposition here. I'm collecting evidence from cities around the United States. So right now I'm going to be talking about the United States specifically, but the more I do research on this, the more I will begin to look transnationally. And while I'm here in London, I've already started to look into archives in the United Kingdom that will help me shore up a transnational argument, and I will talk about that as well tonight. But I'm looking at dispersed archives in multiple formats, collecting evidence from cities around the United States, and I'm collecting evidence in a wide range of media. And I'm looking at photographs, cartes de visite. I'm supposed to change this, I think. Hold on, sorry. I'm looking at photographs, cartes de visite, ideograms, maps, charts, trade films, and other kinds of illustrations that become powerful agents in this production of urban rhetoric in the 20th century. And the artifacts themselves come from a variety of places. And this just gives you a sense of where I'm getting my evidence, sort of where I'm looking for evidence. I'm looking in planning documents and commission reports, that is official reports by different kinds of commissions that are charged by the government to think about urban problems. I'm looking at photo morgues, that is the kind of archival repositories of photography. I'm looking at agency records, that is records of state, federal, and local government organizations. I'm looking into special collections, rare manuscripts, film repositories, periodicals, collections of ephemera, and of course, increasingly, the World Wide Web, which becomes very important, especially in the latter part of the story that I want to tell. So I just wanted to give you a sense of where the particular images are coming from, where I'm actually collecting these things. So, every image of course, exists at the intersection of multiple contexts of production, circulation, and repose. Every image suggests and exists within a nested series of scales as well. And these scales range from the intimacy of the bodies that are depicted in the images themselves to the materiality of the capturing format, that is the photograph or the ideogram, to the urban conditions within which the artifact is created and deployed. So all of these images that I'll be talking about today are both ephemeral visual material, visual artifacts, but they're also solid and material artifacts that have a kind of life beyond just the image itself. They're things that circulate in space and time, and that's something I want to keep in mind as we talk about the images today. But at root, still, despite the fact that these are material artifacts, material pieces that circulate, at root is the depiction itself, that is the subject matter of the image. And while there exists a long tradition of urban image making in the arts, I would argue that it is in the practice of slum photography around which the visual rhetorics of urbanism first constellate in the late 19th and early 20th century. It is the sort of the problem of the slums in urban centers like London, New York City, Philadelphia, and elsewhere that first conditions a response to depict conditions within the city. We're looking here at a set of images taken by Jacob Riis in the late 19th century, mostly in the 1890s in New York City. And these are images primarily taken around areas like the Lower East Side, Little Five Points, Hell's Kitchen, and other places around New York where there are lots of immigrants packed into tenement areas. And for Riis, the depiction process was really one of going around on the streets, and Riis was a crime reporter. And so Riis had access to all the spaces in which, slum dwellers, that is, people who happen to live in slums at any given moment in their lives, are residing. And he had a lot of access to people, to families in tenements, to workers in factories, to homeless people who were living in municipal workhouses, and to kids on the streets. That was a favored visual topic of his. And so Riis really pioneered the construction of this urban imaginary that has to do with conditions in slums in the big cities of the world. He's not the first to do it, certainly not the last to do it, but his book that he publishes from these photographs, How the Other Half Lives, becomes one of the biggest sellers ever to depict this kind of information. And as Riis is pioneering this kind of work, and other photographers are getting into the act, there really begins to emerge very quickly a set of tropes, a set of kind of rhetorical devices that show up over and over and over again in all of the images, especially in the early 20th century. One of the major tropes that show up over and over again, and I'll show you other examples of that, is the kind of depiction of the inner spaces of back alleys and courtyards, the kind of notion of the dangerous spaces of the urban environment that lurk behind what you see on the public face of the city on the streets. And this is a good example of that. But also, there's a fascination with the kind of private business of the family that gets aired publicly, right? That is a sense that there is no kind of boundary, or at least the boundary is utterly perforated between the private sphere of family life and the public domain of street life. And one of the interesting tropes that arises to showcase that perforated boundary is laundry, right? What is laundry but the airing of private business in public, right? And so all of these slum photographs over and over again are kind of obsessed with laundry. You see laundry hanging out to dry in all of these photographs, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of photographs that I've looked at that that depict laundry in one way or another as a kind of metaphor, almost a kind of metonym that recurs over and over again in urban photography that showcases the private family, the private business of the family. Another trope that shows up again and again, as you might imagine, is elimination, the toilet. That is the connection of the human body to the larger kind of infrastructure, metabolism of the city. And there's a great consternation among urban photographers and reformers in the early 20th century about the ways in which people relieve themselves and the unfortunately public nature of urban relieving in the 19th and early 20th century. And so there are just hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of photographs of toilets, commodes in the city, in New York, in Philadelphia, in London, and Paris, and other places. This is a privy vault here in Philadelphia. So these images show up over and over again, and we'll even see more of them as we go along. Another major trope in urban slum photography that I've located or noticed that occurs over and over again is just the basic theme of dilapidation. That is the way in which the built environment crumbles under abuse and misuse of one kind or another. This is a great photograph from Philadelphia, I believe in around 1920, that shows the dilapidation of tenement houses in the north side. And you can see the chimneys sort of lilting spookily back and forth there. Not just dilapidation, there's laundry again, by the way. Not just dilapidation, but also, again, back to the idea of the interior spaces of the courtyards and alley spaces behind the public part of the city. These are the back ends of houses. And you'll notice that this area, this is in St. Louis in Missouri, is so crowded that they've added brick additions on the back of the original houses, and then on the back of the brick additions are still more additions for still more families. And so the built environment has accumulated this kind of ramshackle appearance, this disarray, this disorderliness that began to really irk and bother and worry and trouble urban reformers in the 20th century. It's that disorderliness that is really at the heart, I think, of their complaint about the city. Again, the ramshackle conditions of the interior spaces of the courtyards and alleys. This is in, where is this? Manhattan Avenue. I think New York. That's Philadelphia. Again, the fascination with interiors, the laundry, the private family business in public. And so there emerges in the 20th century a distinct visual language with which reformers begin to depict city life. That is, city life is dangerous, it's disorderly, it's chaotic, it's ungovernable, and there's little separation between the private family and public life, so that the city itself begins to be seen as this place of disorder that needs somehow to be intervened into to make it an orderly place. Now, what we just looked at were images, plain and simple. But these images are, of course, recruited. They're recruited into the business of urban reform. So to read these images simply out of context, that is, just looking at these images and picking out the tropes that we might see occur over and over again, that's all fine and well. But it's also very important to understand how these images come to be contextualized in other kinds of arguments. Otherwise, we'd miss much of the story. So I'm also interested in how these particular images then are recruited to serve a range of interests and agendas in the 20th century city. So if we go back to the idea of slum photography, here's an image that Lewis Hine took in Boston. There again, you notice the laundry, very exciting. And this is a group of children playing in a back alleyscape. That is, again, this kind of obsession with the interiorization, the unknown and unknowable interior spaces of the city, and the idea that through photography through a kind of photographic agenda, a visual agenda, that we can begin to illuminate these backspaces, to begin to understand them, to recruit them into some other kind of visual rhetoric. And so here's Louis Hine's image. But of course, Louis Hine is a photographer of great importance in the mold of Jacob Riis and others. He actually had studied at Toynbee Hall here in Britain, and then also at Hull House in Chicago. And so his image then becomes part of a kind of stock set of images that are available to people around the country to use as kind of demonstrations of urban problems. So Louis Hine takes thousands of photographs that become circulated and cycled into this kind of rhetorical morass that's in this very generative moment in the early 20th century. And so his pictures find themselves into all kinds of publications and other sorts of venues. The images taken I actually don't know who took these photographs. It's really an anonymous or unknown photographer, but this is from a set of boards that were created by the New York City Health Commission in the 1920s to showcase the so-called public health problems of the city of New York. So here's social conditions in Manhattan, and they had hundreds and hundreds of these boards actually created with pictures upon pictures upon pictures of slum conditions in the city of New York. Now, of course, we're looking at very bad conditions in cities. I mean, I'm not suggesting that these aren't bad conditions. I'm actually not so much interested in trying to assess what's bad and what's good about the conditions depicted. I'm more interested in the kind of recurrence of tropes and imaginaries in these particular images. Here's an image of a tenement in St. Louis that was photographed, then it was reproduced. It was adhesed. You can even see the adhesion, the glue. It was stuck into an application for the first public housing project in St. Louis that was sent from the local government to the federal government. And they even typed underneath the interior block conditions of 1617 Wash Street, the rear. So again, this fascination with these kind of rear alleyscapes. Place to get barbecue, apparently. Social reformers would create their own kind of notebooks with these images, and then they would write in their notebooks interesting observations or survey data or information from going around from place to place looking at these images and the places they depicted. And of course, again, here's a set of privy vaults, the toilets in the center, and the laundry and the interior court space, which is the kind of classic depiction of tenement life in the United States at this point. And this image then gets published in a document that is meant to convince people to vote for funds to demolish slums in the 1920s and 30s in St. Louis. So there's recruitment going on. The images there are multiple images being produced. Those images are getting recruited into a variety of agendas, and it doesn't stop there, of course. Obviously, the most important part of the story is that the images, they're deeply rhetorical, of course, and they organize powerful arguments about the cities and their problems. But without their reproducibility, the images really couldn't have a broad impact. And so it's to the mechanical reproduction of images that we have to turn to understand the power that these images have to shape conceptions of the city in the 20th century. And the mechanical reproduction of images, of course, predates photography. Obviously, there's a whole tradition of engravature and other traditions that are about reproducing images en masse. This is from Harper's Weekly, a very important and famous and wide circulating magazine in the 19th century in the United States. And this is a depiction of slum conditions I think mostly in Chinatown in New York, I believe. But that shows that there's certainly a set of images and tropes and depictions of life in urban neighborhoods that predates photography. And many of these tropes get started even before photography. So there's the whole notion of urban overcrowding, of the dangerous city, of dangerous social classes, and of the kind of unsanitary social and hygienic conditions in which people live in the cities, and that becomes troped as a problem that needs to be solved. Another important area of reproducibility in the late 19th, early 20th century is stereographic cards. Stereographic cards are a kind of major piece of consumer kit in this period, and everyone would, everyone middle class, even working class people would have a stereographic card reader, and they would buy stereograph cards. And many of these stereograph cards were created specifically, in these cases, for reformers to go around and give talks to people, and they could show the stereographic cards to people. Lantern slides, of course, long predate the kind of general photography. This is an image that was taken by Jacob Riis that was transformed into a lantern slide and then hand painted. And this image would be something that Jacob Riis or one of his compatriots or colleagues, rather, would take on the road with them with their lantern slide show to demonstrate to people the poor conditions of the slums in New York City. In this case, this is in Bandits Alley in Little Five Point, maybe an image that people have seen before, though probably not in color. So as I said, Jacob Riis's photographs were first published in How the Other Half Lives, which came out in 1893 originally. The photographs themselves were actually very poorly reproduced. You can see the poor reproduction quality at the time. We really are not at a point where we have good photographic reproduction technology in the United States. The images that show up the best are the ones where the photographs have been turned into engravings. And the bottom piece is actually a photograph that then an engraver translated basically into an engraving that could then, the plate could then be put into the press and reproduced more easily, more legibly. The Octavia Hill Association was another pioneer in this work. Octavia Hill, of course, was a British reformer, a very important kind of early founder of social work in the United Kingdom. The Octavia Hill Association was created in Philadelphia, named after, of course, Octavia Hill. And they produced a document, really a pioneering document called Housing Conditions in Philadelphia, in which all of these kind of tropes I've been talking about are then put into practice in this document. And I don't need to rehearse them here. I think you get the idea of what these particular tropes about the city are. Again, many books come out in the early 20th century and into the mid-20th century that document urban conditions in a way that presupposes a particular kind of solution, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But here are the kind of depictions in these books that you see: the dilapidated alleyscapes, these kind of back alley landscapes with lots of children, kind of the images of poverty, basically, that come up over and over again. This caption is amazing: the home of 6 modified milk babies. Kind of a deeply troubling sort of caption, and meant to stir, stir people to action, to make interventions. Some call this home. Again, there's the laundry, ever waving freely above. The shame of St. Louis. This practice continues well through the first half of the 20th century and beyond, in fact, whereas this is the early 20th century. This publication actually comes out in the 1940s. This is a publication by the St. Louis Housing Authority, whose business it is to construct social housing, public housing, as we call it in the United States. And so they're showing the conditions of the neighborhood before they make the public housing intervention to justify the act of intervention itself. This set of tropes just continues well through the 20th century, even into the 1970s, when the Environmental Protection Agency actually commissioned a group of around 30 to 40 photographers to go out across the United States and to gather images of conditions in poor neighborhoods and elsewhere in the United States. And this is El Paso, Texas, where they gathered quite a number of these images. And it's the same kind of visual language in many ways that we saw in the early 20th century. It's in the 1970s, it still persists. Some differences, but mainly still intact. This is Chicago, and public housing projects in Chicago. So, remember, all this is, all these kind of recruitments of these urban images are towards an end. And that end is really the end of renewal. That is the kind of remaking of the city in the 20th century. That is the photographers, the social reformers, others who are actually interested in using these images to make arguments aren't interested in just depicting slum conditions. That's just a means to an end. The end in sight, of course, is the remaking of the city, right? That is the transformation of these neighborhoods by a variety of means, and we'll talk about that. So I would argue, and I will argue in this work that I undertake, that the ways in which the city comes to be visualized in the 20th century conditions both the discourse of urban problems and the form that urban solutions take at one and the same time. So that urban problems are not imagined primarily in terms of the structural conditions of capital or the uneven distribution of wealth, right? The urban problems that we've seen over and over again, they're not troped in a way that suggests that these are structural conditions or conditions of maldistribution. Rather, urban problems are seen to derive primarily from the physical attributes of cities themselves. So therefore, the solutions have to be physical in nature, right? So the solution isn't the redistribution of wealth, the solution is the physical reorganization of the city, right? So what then are the rhetorics of renewal that arise as a language of urban solution? This language adopts a set of powerful rhetorics in the mid-19th century. So here clearly, and right now I'm going to talk about the kind of rhetoric of renewal. Here in this, I think the rhetoric here is very clear, very plain, very obvious. It doesn't really require any elaboration. It's merely to say that the slums are a kind of physical problem. And in this case, that physical problem allies to the body. That is, the slums are a kind of cancerous condition on which you have to perform surgery to remove them. Very, very brutal and bloody metaphors, in fact. How to get rid of slums? Well, it's easy, in fact. You don't redistribute the wealth. You don't, you don't just shift around the social structure. You destroy the slums, and then you rebuild on top of them. And it's magic, in fact. And so this is this is an ideogram that powerfully represents, I think, that kind of physical troping of the nature of urban problems and therefore the condition of urban solutions. Again, this is the same kind of rhetoric about making transformations. And within this rhetoric is embedded, I think, a very interesting visual trope, not just a kind of pictorial one, but literally a visual one. And that's what I would call the reveal. That is a kind of axis around which two things revolve, a before and after, basically. That is, there's a moment of revelation, of revealing the new city. So we see the old city, and then we see the new city, the kind of conditions of possibilities that can be met by these kind of urban transformations. And once we begin to look at all the kinds of imagery that are available to us in the 20th century, we begin to see this kind of reveal axis over and over again between the old city and the new city. Even if it's not as perfect or as as angular or easy to see, it's often there. It's embedded in the imagery. This is a poster from the 1930s produced by the Works Projects Administration in the New Deal to convince people that a physical reconstruction of the city is really the best way forward. Again, another reveal. Again, obvious kind of reveal from the old city to the new. In this case, promoted by Strand Steel Corporation. Another reveal, little bit of interesting artwork by the St. Louis Housing Authority, very adorable. And in addition to that, there are many other kinds of visual tropes, or these kind of things that occur over and over again in images. And this one is one I would call the hand of man. That is people pointing at things, right? And I'm always tempted to call it the visual trope of white men pointing. And in fact, that's what it is over and over again. You see this constant stream of images flowing in the mid-20th century of well-placed men, usually architects, city planners, planning commissioners, people with a lot of power to make decisions about the city, Le Corbusier, in fact, pointing to things over and over again. Here's His Honor in the center, the mayor of Chicago, the Richard Daley the Elder, with a group of architects and planners overlooking a model of the new city. And it's not just in the United States, obviously. Here's Minoru Yamasaki in the center, pointing towards Pruitt-Igoe, which is the public housing project I showed you in the beginning that I'm actually working on as a book. And related to this, this set of tropes as well. And here again, I think we see the reveal in action. We see this interesting kind of angle that separates new and old cities. There's also the surveil. And that is a very important trope that we see over and over again. And it's transnational. It's not restricted to the United States. This is the United Kingdom, London, in fact, the Netherlands. This is a planning document from St. Louis. And so that's another trope that we see over and over again. Here it is again, the kind of surveillance of either the old city or the new city for one reason or another. And then there are these kinds of images that sort of put all these things together. This is a very interesting image, I think, in that it really combines a lot of those rhetorics into one. And what you see actually over and over again are images that really do this. They combine a whole set of rhetorics into one kind of image over and over again. And of course, there's also very powerful gendered language here in this image about sort of whose hand controls the matter of production of the house, and that's interesting too. I can't even get into this, but there are at least 1,000 pictures of guys on bulldozers with nice clothes who are clearly not driving the bulldozer. And that happens over again. I love these photographs. I want one of myself, actually, like this. And these are, of course, these are mayors and planning commissioners and housing authority officials, and they get on the bulldozer and they pose, and then the guys go and knock the slums down. And this is just one, but I can assure you there's at least 1,000 of these images from cities all across the United States, Canada, I'm sure elsewhere. So, another really powerful or major technique for rendering the urban knowable, that is understandable, knowable in the first place, and therefore controllable, is through what I would call modulation, or the production of modularities. And by that I mean reducing the city in scalar size or breaking the city down into component parts, right? So representing the city as a manageable whole with parts that can be manipulated and transformed at will. So this is an old condition, right? This is an old rhetorical condition that long predates mechanical reproduction, but we see it organized here very powerfully, for example, at the 1939 World's Fair in New York City. This is the General Motors Futurama exhibit. So it reduces the city to this kind of modular scale that can be surveilled with ease and understood. So architectural models become really important in the 20th century for brokering these kinds of interests in the city. Again, here's that kind of the hand of man, the God and the God eye, combined with this sense of modularity, or this notion of modularity in making the city knowable and containable and controllable. Again, the same trope. Again, a very creepy iteration of the trope. The guy's claws sort of coming. It's very scary. I have nightmares about this guy. We'll come back to this image in a minute. Again, this kind of creepy sort of crunching a part of the city and modulating it into these easily managed squares. Again, the kind of I don't know I don't understand this rhetoric. If any of you do, whose hand is that? I don't know. Is that the state? Is it corporation? I really just don't understand it. Again, the kind of modulation to make things more legible and easy to contain and understand and control. Modulation of industrial centers. The only image I've actually ever found where there's a female depicted holding or containing some piece of urban space or architecture, I think is a very interesting piece. Or modulation through ideograms like this, where simplistic depictions are meant to convey arguments about the city. So of course we know the city is full of millions of buildings or hundreds of thousands of tenements, but this is modulated in such a way that depicts the city in these representational rubrics. And note, of course, how the standard and substandard versions of housing are depicted, of course. The standard house that no one, in fact, lives in St. Louis in this case, which is where this comes from, is a cottage. No one lives in a cottage in St. Louis, but that's the standard home, right, that's depicted there. Apparently, perhaps a national standard. Whereas everyone else, of course, lives in these kind of tenement houses that you see depicted in the center and on the right. In addition to modulation, another powerful area and key feature of the urban imaginary in the 20th century is cartography, or the God eye. The mapping yields a representation of space, but it's important to recall that, of course, the map is never the territory. Rather, maps are arguments about space. They are visual instruments of containment and control. They make arguments, they're rhetorical devices for helping us, or at least trying to depict and help us understand cities. These are hilarious. These are three of the kind of major models that have evolved over the 20th century among urban scholars to help depict and understand the city. The well-known Burgess concentric zone model, where you can see how the city is structured and organized. The Hoyt sectoral model in the middle, which was an articulation of the Burgess model. And then the Harrison-Ullman model that emerged in the 1960s to try to add a little bit of complexity to the problem. These are kind of favored of urban geographers and sociologists. I've always found them deeply hilarious in a certain sense. But in fact, what I really read these not so much as depictions or even descriptions of the city, but as kind of imaginaries, as sort of willful attempts to convey a very simple idea of the vast complexities that cities actually really present to us. Mapping then becomes a form of urban control. That is because it's linked directly to kind of the production of urban knowledge, which is, I think, a very important and key feature to keep in mind about mapping. This again shows you a map that's created by a Philadelphia organization that shows the interior spaces. Again, the fascination with the interior spaces of the alleyscapes of Philadelphia. Here we have ethnic mapping. Apparently it's important for the Octavia Hill Association to know where Jews and Negroes, Jewish, mixed, Italian, and others live. And that of course, becomes a very important part of the argument for urban intervention, is the kind of complicated, complex mixing of people in this multi-ethnic, multilingual society that creates these ungovernable cities. Another powerful trope that shows up in mapping is the kind of the mapping of real estate values in cities. That is, the assessment values of blocks and of the city, so that planners can become aware of how much each block of the city is actually worth, in not only in market terms, but in terms of rateability, that is taxability, taxation. And that becomes a powerful determinant of where they begin to do their interventions, because the areas of the city that are worth the least are the places where they begin to intervene the most. And of course, in the United States, very importantly, is the cartography of apartheid, the cartography that structures a vision of the city as racially distinct and separable. Here is a WPA produced map of the city of St. Louis, where in fact the city planner has been so kind as to gently outline the area called the Negro District for the benefit of the real estate exchange, who will then use that map to determine where they actually steer people in terms of buying houses, or where banks are going to be willing to make loans, for example, to whites or to blacks. This gets even more powerfully reinforced in other cities like Philadelphia, where they're even more thoroughly color-coded. And then most famously at the federal level, this gets encoded into a set of maps that are produced both by the Federal Housing Administration and what's called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And these are federal agencies whose business it is to underwrite loans and secure loans for private developers and real estate owners. And one of the ways in which they assess security and risk in making those loans is through racial composition of neighborhoods. And so the kind of fears that they have of African American neighborhoods and neighborhoods where white working class and black working class people mix, those fears become literally coded in color onto maps of cities. So this is Philadelphia. All the areas of red are bad risk investments, which are of course areas where there's not just dilapidated or old housing, but also where lots of African Americans live, and then lots of mixed multi-ethnic neighborhoods are. And so the more racially distinct the neighborhood, the better the risk they thought that it would make. Now, of course, this is not based on any kind of data that's really necessarily plausible. It's really based on a set of fears about race in American cities and race mixing. So this is Philadelphia over time. This is 34, I think 35 or 36. Finally, the last map is made in 37. It gets progressively more complicated, more complex, the way they kind of gerrymander the city along the lines of race. Another important part of the kind of mapping process in city planning is depicting the kind of is basically outlining areas of the city for redevelopment and renewal. That is putting the actual pen on the paper and making lines around the city, and those maps, those kind of depictions of the city with parts of it carved up by lines that are drawn by planners, get published in planning documents and other kinds of publications that are meant to persuade people that these kinds of interventions are a good idea. Here's our creepy zoning guy again. This is another major act of cartography in cities in the 20th century, the act of zoning. That is taking the complexity of the city that you see on the left, the actual description of land uses, real uses of land, residential, commercial, etc., and then trying to separate those uses into different zones that don't overlap, that is, getting residential separated from commercial. It's basically back to the idea of trying to make what they perceive as a chaotic and ungovernable city manageable, controllable, legible, and governable for the 20th century. And to do that, part of the way you do that is to rip out slums and destroy them and clear them. Another way you do that is to zone areas of the city for single uses. And so these maps become very important in cities across the United States in the 20th century. Here's another one, for example. Not color-coded, but the same idea. And then this just simply gets translated into the electronic age, the computer age, not necessarily with handwritten notes, but actually through punch card programs that then get translated into data sets that then inform city planning decisions and then get translated into these kind of nice zoning maps. Another important area of cartography is the kind of tourist geographies. That is the geographies of tourism, the geographies of spectatorship. This is the tourist geography of New York City, which I love, this map, because basically it's like it's Manhattan and a little bit of Brooklyn and a tiny sliver of Queens. And you wouldn't dare want to go anywhere else than that, apparently. There's a great map actually in a London guidebook that I have that has the same kind of depiction. And this area that we're in right now isn't part of the tourist geography. It's just gray. There's no depiction. And all the other parts have these multicolors, and they're all pretty, and this area is just gray. And so it sort of kind of gives you a sense of the cartography of tourism that evolves in the 20th century. And those maps actually are powerfully reinforcing, I think, in a lot of ways. I'll just go through this really quickly. At the same time that this is going on, there's an effort after World War II, basically, to not simply convince people that cities have to be taken apart and reconfigured, but also that we need to rebuild whole areas and expand cities into suburban locations. Part of that has to do with what are called the changeover problems after World War II. That is, there's a great fear of a return to the Depression after World War II, and so the idea is to get the American economy humming again by producing more and more durable goods that people buy, producing more automobiles, and then of course you need the proper kind of house to live in where you can use the automobile and put your consumer durables, and that house of course is not in the city, it's in the suburbs. And so suburban development becomes inextricably linked in many ways to those kind of urban imaginaries that we've talked about so far. And then the city becomes linked more and more with the idea of public living, that is living in the street, living on the sidewalks, and that good living is in fact not public living. Good living is moving to the suburbs, where the three big ideas of 1950 are climate control, privacy, and the American style. There's jowly Nixon and jowly Khrushchev jowling it up in Moscow. This is the kitchen debate of 1957, where they debated the merits of private enterprise versus collective means of production. Again, suggest the kind of standardization as a means of this modulation and standardization as a means of control, as a means of easily rendering the city easily manageable. And basically selling the consumer paradise through mass suburbanization. I love that image. That pretty much sums it up, in fact. This really is the American dream as it gets promulgated in the 1950s and 1960s, really even up to the crash. And if you want to know why we had a crash, well, here we go. We can come back to that, of course. So this is the selling of a consumer paradise in suburbia. With the consequence of which is this in the cities. So we'll go back to this idea of reconfigurations, that is reconfiguring the metropolis so that the interior of the city becomes beset by urban renewal, mass slum clearance, large-scale reconstruction, whereas the periphery, the suburban lands become part of this kind of mass consumer utopia. Of ever expanding markets and lifestyles. So cities begin to see more and more bulldozers applied to more and more parts. Whole districts of downtowns just get whacked, basically. And this is downtown St. Louis, just utterly torn apart for redevelopment, reconstruction. This is the newly remade city. This is Kalamazoo in Michigan. That whole area that you see in the middle was a slum neighborhood or a tenement neighborhood that was torn down and rebuilt. And of course, my project, Pruitt-Igoe, is part of this history, part of this dismantling of the city and its reconfiguration into something different. And you can really see how this 20th century architectural form really challenges the 19th century city around it with a new model, a new enterprise of urban living. Now, of course, by the 1960s, the inner cities really can't take that much of that kind of thing anymore, and they erupt into wide-scale revolt, which then causes even more exodus to the suburbs and more deterioration in the inner cities, and to the point where obviously by 1990s and 2000s, we have a situation in which we've really reversed the relationship between cities and suburbs. By now, by the 1990s and 2000s, the largest number of people actually now live in suburban areas rather than central cities in the United States. And so there's a vast kind of political and social imbalance that has emerged. Now, at the same time, that's not the simple end of the story. There is a kind of resurgence of interest in cities that emerges in the 1970s and 80s. I mean, obviously that happened in the UK too, that happened in other cities in Europe and other places. So there is a resurgence that's really driven by a kind of historic preservation impulse, a kind of search for authenticity that becomes very important in the 1960s and 1970s after all the revolts, after all the kind of social revolutions that are occurring. There's more and more a sense that we need authentic forms of living, and so cities become once again part of an apparatus of visual surveillance and part of a set of arguments and tropes, a new set of arguments and tropes. The upper left is the destruction of Penn Station in New York City in the 1960s, which then creates a mass wave of interest in historic preservation and adaptive reuse and recording the old built environment, which leads, in fact, to a widespread a series of episodes of gentrification in cities throughout the United States, accompanied by their own kind of visual tropes. The loft as a kind of trope, in fact, becomes a very, very kind of powerful image in American culture of urban living, for better or for worse. And of course, these reconfigured landscapes in downtown areas become thematized, right? They become reconfigured through both historic preservation and new building. A kind of combination of all those things by the 1970s and 1980s has led to a kind of re-thematizing of downtown areas of cities. In this case, in Baltimore, the re-theming of the waterfront as a kind of pleasure playground by the Rouse Corporation, with new malls, new build construction, adaptive reuse, and kind of faux historicism, I suppose, if you want to put it that way, of a tourist geography. Now, in kind of trying to wrap up this conversation, one of the important things that I'm interested in when I look at these histories is to look at the alternatives as well. And everything I've told you about the rhetorics, the visual rhetorics of urbanism in the 20th century, these are very powerful, and they have really, really intense impact on the cities in the 20th century. That is, the visual rhetorics frame not only what we think cities are and how they function, but also frame the nature of the solutions we think need to be applied to them. But at the same time, there are alternatives that exist throughout the 20th century that have to be noted. We can't just say that it's all this and not that. For example, one very important set of institutions in cities are the settlement houses. The settlement house movements actually are important spaces for the production of counter-narratives to some of these ideas that slums, for example, are irredeemable places that have to be physically destroyed. Hull House and Jane Addams, for example, in Chicago, or Toynbee Hall in the East End of London, were very vocal opponents of the idea that slums should be just simply fully demolished and rebuilt with other kinds of functions. So Hull House was very much a kind of urban institution in the best sense of the word, functioning as a kind of community center all through the teens and 20s and into the 30s. There's a tradition underlying the tradition of Americans moving out of the cities into the suburbs. There's also a tradition of celebrating the city as a kind of space of multicultural possibility, as a space of possibility for a plural democracy. In this case, Israel Zangwill's great play, The Melting Pot, which is a very famous play in the early 20th century. There was an actual National Resource Committee that was created by President Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s to actually look at ways to strengthen cities, not to tear slums down, but really what the role of cities were in the economy. And it was a very optimistic report that actually never really went anywhere. But it made great arguments for that we would recognize today as important arguments that are pro-city arguments. And it's worth sort of resurrecting some of these ideas. There was a tradition of photography throughout the 20th century that didn't denigrate, but rather celebrated the city. So these aren't the kind of slumming photographers like Jacob Riis and Louis Hine that are going looking for problems. These are photographers who are really interested in depicting cities in all of their kind of complexity, in their majesty and in their horror. And this is a group of photographers that I really like. This is Arthur Rothstein's image. Believe it or not, this is taken in the 30s. So he was doing color photography in the 30s. One of my very favorite photographers ever, in the top left and bottom right, Gordon Parks. Those are images from his series of work on Chicago. William Klein in the upper right. That's a wonderful image that he created. So these are really interesting, I think, kind of counter-narratives, I would say, to this kind of countercultural tradition in the arts that opposes those other traditions. A drawing tradition that really was kept alive in a large respect through Harper's Magazine, through the New Yorker, through other major publications. For example, here's a sort of cartoon or drawing that appeared in the New Yorker right after World War II by Saul Steinberg. This is in many ways a kind of depiction of the busyness of the city, but I would argue a great celebration of the city in all its hustle and bustle. And even a kind of tentative support through the 20th century by certain institutions, in this case the Public Affairs Committee, which was a government agency or organization, that tentatively suggested that government interference need not be negative, in fact. Maybe there are some good things that come from taxing and spending, for example. So an argument we might kind of remind the Tories now. You can create public housing, you can improve education, you can have medical care, you can conserve soils and have transportation, all these kinds of things. That there's this alternative tradition that I think is very important. Another interesting area I think to look at in terms of trying to recover alternative histories are the histories of renewal projects that never actually happened. That is, these kind of grand designs and schemes that kind of litter the landscape of our libraries and archives of great projects that never really actually came to fruition. This is a project for the redevelopment of a huge swath of New York City that, thank God, was never actually put into place. But these are interesting alternative histories that ought to be looked at. To sort of wrap this up, I'd like to just quickly comment on a few of what I think are the most interesting kind of current areas of practice that are at work where the kind of visual registrations are used as arguments, but in kind of counter cultural ways or kind of counter narratives to dominant narratives of urbanism in both the United States and abroad, in fact. And I call it praxis simply because that's the idea, of course, that there's a constant iteration between theory and practice, and that each informs the other, and that's actually what's quite rich, I think, about current art practices. And I would argue that there's there's a wide range of practices, a wide range of praxis around artistic interventions into cities ongoing right now. But I would contend that there's around 7 or 8 categories in which we can really sort of put these, and not that every art intervention, urban intervention needs to be put in a category, but it's a way to try to sort of understand what's going on. And one of the categories is the category of the dérive, of course, which descends from the Situationists, and this is Barbara Holob's Vienna and Hong Kong in the upper left-hand corner, very interesting project. There's performance. Performance, I think, is a very important aspect of intervention that's being deployed increasingly in cities to challenge basic conceptions about urbanism and urban space. This is Will Domer's Bodies in Urban Space, which I think is a great performance piece. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. There's the geocode, which is the kind of rise of the geocoding of the city through simultaneous electronic means, where information can be shared digitally across platforms and formats in multiple places at once. And that's a very exciting development, pioneered in this case by a Dutch collective that I could talk more about in Q&A. And there's rupture. There's these kind of rupturous elements that are introduced into the urban environment. And I love this piece in the lower right-hand corner by Valentine Beinroth and Florian Jennett, which is called Guns. And they produced 50 handguns using ice, colored ice, and placed them all over Berlin so that people could just pick them up and walk around with them. And of course, they melted. But a lot of people got stopped by police and questioned, and it you know, of course, caused a rupture in the kind of daily life of the city, which is very interesting. Top left-hand corner is, I think, an important area of artistic practice that's really emerged, what I would call kit. And this is a piece of kit by the collective Plot called Mini Cooper Tent, which can be just placed in any parking space, and you can do urban camping. You know, in your city. And it's a way to sort of reclaim parking spaces. I mean, enormous swaths of our cities are taken over by auto-dominant uses. And this is a way to kind of reclaim those areas for people in a lot of ways. Of course, there's the virus, the kind of viral art intervention. This is Cindy Chang's wonderful sticker, I Wish This Was, which, you know, she produced tens of thousands of these stickers and sent them all over the world, so that people could put the sticker on something and write what they wish it was. I think I wish this was my art gallery. It's probably a very posh space. And then psychogeography. This is a really wonderful piece by I Furiosi in Dusseldorf, which shows a square meter of the city in Dusseldorf and how much it's worth in that particular place. And so it's a way to sort of bring attention to the ever-escalating, skyrocketing housing prices that create the unjust city. There are other kinds of practices as well that I think fall outside of some of these categories, or they skirt the boundaries of categories. This is the Heidelberg Project, which I love, in Detroit, which is just a bunch of residents in a neighborhood in Detroit just decided to start gluing things to houses and painting trees and painting the streets, and you know, just basically transforming their neighborhood into a work of art that's really quite extraordinary. If you're ever in Detroit, I would urge you to see that project. This is Watts Towers in Los Angeles, a kind of labor of love by an individual and a few others for 30 or 40 years. Obviously, the whole tradition that was very important in New York City of public graffiti writing, especially on trains. The kind of history of murals in the United States and elsewhere that's very important. This is a mural of a Chicano Resource Center in Chicago. These are some of the murals in Philadelphia. Philadelphia probably has the greatest number of murals of any city in the United States. Really important pieces of current art practice that are very important at the community level. The photographs of Camille Jose Vergara, some of you have probably seen him speak here in the UK. He speaks fairly frequently here in London because his brother lives here. His photographs are extraordinary, and I think in a lot of ways, problematic in some ways, but I think his practice is very important in that he traces the kind of the change, the degradation in cities after industries leave, after capital is withdrawn, and creates a visual record of those things for posterity, and I think that's a very important project. This is work by an art, now I'm blanking on this guy's name. Does anyone know this piece? I think it's de Bosa. Alejandro de Bosa, I think, is who this is. He's a really wonderful photographer who takes beautifully layered photographs of cities in kind of all their complexity and celebrates that complexity over and over again. Obviously, there's a whole tradition of art and psychogeography that descends from the Situationists. It's alive and well today. That's to be sort of noted and celebrated. Chief among those exponents in the U.S. in the 70s 60s and 70s was Gordon Matta Clark. And his urban interventions, I think, were some of the most powerful and interesting that happened in the United States. These are, the top are two photographs are this series where he was basically cutting giant holes through a building. He would do things like create wormholes that would go all through the interior spaces of a giant building. The bottom left-hand image is a piece that he sawed out of a building and then put in a gallery. And then he did a fake estates project on the lower right. Many of you have probably heard of this, where he actually used the New York, great resource in New York City, which is the New York City Land Registry Agency. And he found dozens and dozens of little pieces of land, sometimes no wider than a foot and no longer than 3 or 4 feet, that were never actually parceled and sold. And so he went around and actually bought them. And so he owned, several acres of land in New York City, but in like little tiny pieces all over the city. And he would program them. He would put art in those spaces. It was really a quite remarkable project. There's a whole tradition now since the 1970s of great public art projects. This is in Minneapolis, a wonderful art project by Armajani, the public artist, to create a bridge between two parts of the community that had been devastated by the creation of that interstate highway that you see, which was part of that earlier project of urban reconfiguration that we talked about. So this is an attempt to heal those wounds that were created in the earlier phase. The work of J.R., the French artist, I think is very interesting. This is in the favela in Rio. This is in Kibera in Nairobi. I actually spent time in this area of Nairobi, one of the largest slum neighborhoods in the world, in fact. And these are J.R.'s paintings of people's eyes and faces who actually live in the neighborhood. They actually helped in the creation of this project. Another wonderful project is in the digital realm, and the increasing use of GIS, I think, in urban intervention is really important and something to keep an eye on. This is $1 Million Blocks by the Spatial Information Design Lab at Columbia. And basically, this is a depiction of all the blocks, in this case in Brooklyn, but they do it elsewhere, of all the blocks in Brooklyn that spend over $1 million to incarcerate men in prison. What you actually see is this amazing landscape come to life, especially in the upper right-hand corner, of all these blocks that spend, any block that's red of any shade is a place that spends $1 million or more to incarcerate people from that block in prison. And so it gives you these amazing landscapes. And top left is a kind of in and out flow chart of people to and from prisons, from Brooklyn to prisons around the country. It's a very powerful project, and it can really inform. Because the idea is, of course, that what if you spent that $1 million in that block on something else, right? Like education or healthcare. I'll skip some of these other things, but there's a whole range of really great work that's been going on since the 70s and 80s. The squatting movement in the United States, specifically in New York City, created a great kind of upswelling of artwork and art interventions in the city. This is a bunch of work by Seth Tobukman. Center for Urban Pedagogy is an organization I work with that does a number of different kinds of interventions, founded by Damon Rich and Rostin Wu. This organization basically connects artists to nonprofit organizations and community groups to create these kind of public policy-oriented projects. Like this vendor power, for example, is a fold-out sort of cartoon, basically, or comic strip that is used to inform vendors of their rights to use space in New York City. And there's a whole bunch of other projects I could talk about. Great stuff going on, obviously, here in London. I've been very excited by what's going on in Peckham Space. This is that wonderful, again, back to the idea of modularity and the modularization of the city at small scale. But in this case, this is done by artists working with the people who actually live in that community, and the buildings that are modular can be moved around and reconfigured and reshaped by the people who actually are there using the model. And so I think that's a really interesting kind of inversion of the older trope that we saw before. So I'll leave it at that. I think that gives you a good sense of where the next project is going, and I hope that if you have questions, you'll just shoot them out right now. So thank you.